Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Geeky Clinicians podcast, episode number 6.
Yeah.
Hey. And so on today's episode of Geeky Clinicians podcast, we have a very special guest, fellow LPC clinician, William Hemphill, who's our neighbor here in Decatur. And we're so excited to talk to him. As always, I'm Dr. Deborah, Chief Geek here at Geeky Clinicians. And joining me today is other fellow Geeky clinician.
I'm Jacinta the lead geek.
And so we are so excited to talk to William today. I have known William for a couple of years now, and we met very serendipitously. And so he's an awesome, awesome person, an awesome clinician. And I'm just going to jump in and let you introduce yourself. I think we'll just kind of talk today, and I definitely want to touch on this topic of imposter syndrome. William, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Well, it's good to be here. Good to see both of you today. I'm William Hemphill. I am a minister, pastoral counselor, LPC, the owner of Faith and Family Empowerment, where we do a lot of work helping couples navigate conflict resolution, build communication skills, and increase connection. I'm also professional speaker that actually speaks a lot about relationships with the Elevate Relationship seminars. And I also speak about imposter syndrome, how to recognize and overcome imposter syndrome. So that's a little bit about me professionally. So
Welcome, welcome. So William, you mentioned obviously you being a minister, pastoral counselor, and also an LPC. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a geeky clinician, your journey to becoming an LPC?
all right. Well, first of all, geeky clinicians, good. I'm a graduate from Georgia Tech, so I could be considered a nerd for most of my life. Still, I still find myself being odd in my family. They want to play cards and I want to go read a book or something like that. So my journey to counseling is kind of interesting. I'm probably second or third career person. Started in background, as I said, I went to Georgia Tech, graduated, was an engineer, worked in telecom for about 11, 12 years in engineer project management. Somewhere near the end of that time, I actually started going to seminary because I'd felt the call into ministry. And so somewhere around 2001, somewhere before 9/11 hit, I like to say the company gave me the opportunity to pursue seminary full time. That's what we call when they lay you off. Laid me off with about 69,000 plus other people after, 2000, So we did that, started going to seminary. And while I was in seminary, I took a class called Pastoral Care and Counseling. And so I took that class, and it's kind of funny, ironic. I remember being at odds with the professor on a lot of things, but I did take one thing he said to heart, and that was that every minister needs to have a therapist just because of all the things they dealt with.
Yes.
So I went to a therapist, someone who actually Christian faith, majored in psychology, was a psychologist. Well, sitting there, I started thinking, hey, this might be cool to be able to blend these two aspects together, the spiritual aspect and the psychological aspect. And so I kept that in mind, graduated from seminary, actually did some work pastoring a church for several years, but also did a lot of work as a hospital and a hospice chaplain. So did that for several years. And then somewhere around 2014 is when I went back to school to get my degree in master's in mental health counseling, and then have been training and running my own business since then.
Okay. A very awesome journey from engineering, telecom to really being pouring into humans and doing this clinical work. It's a really interesting shift, but both aspects of yourself that you bring to this space. And you mentioned doing the pastoral care and counseling and having done the hospital and hospice work. And you may not know that Jacinta is known as the grief guru.
Ah.
And so grief and end of life issues are a specialty of hers.
So I'm sure we'll have fun conversations just because
All
we
right.
did plenty of that work for many years, and I still do a little bit of it part-time and on occasion. So
Yeah. It's a special calling, right?
yes, it is. You know, it's kind of funny because I remember when I was doing work, especially more so as a hospice chaplain, sometimes I get the question from people and say, how could you do that? And I'm like, well, I'm graced to do it. Of course, I'm like, I say, well, how can you be someone who works as an ambulance driver, trying to hit people and give
Yeah.
chest compressions and cutting them and doing whatever else they do? Because I said, that's not my grace and
All
gifting.
right.
So I like to say a lot of it is just grace and gifting at what you're able to do.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
Yeah. So grace and gifting, I love that concept because I feel like all of us, we kind of are really, I think that's one of the things that aligns people to actually be geeky clinicians, right? As a community, the people that are drawn to this space are really, I feel like they are living in their purpose and really filled by the work that we do. It's not there are tons of licensed clinicians, there are tons of professionals out there, but for a lot of people, it's a job or it's something, or status or something like that. But in order to be a geeky clinician, it really is that grace, it is that gifting, it is that operating out of that space of purpose and calling. And so that's my 2 cents on that. Your practice. Tell us about your practice, faith and family empowerment. And you said you work with couples.
Mhm.
Hats off to you. Been there, done that, and was like, it's a skill set that I do not have. I cannot and do not do couples, and I really admire those who can, because to me, honestly, it's too many moving parts in the room. Tell us your journey there. Tell us a little bit about
Deborah, are you saying you enjoy sitting there and watching people going back and fighting each other and calling each other names and all that other stuff and blaming the other person for their problems?
Yeah, no, I've tried and I get lost. I'm like, wait, who said what? Like, what's happening? It's very much, it's too much for me.
Yeah. I will say it does take a skill set and a passion. So part of my story is I tell people from time I'm a child of divorce. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old. I remember them fighting early in the home, and I like to say they fought a lot probably until I got married. You know, I thought it was kind of funny when I was getting married and they're sitting there having conversations, apologizing to each other. I'm like, now y'all did it. It take long enough. So, you know, but seeing that, knowing that a lot of people are doing that, realizing that a lot of times we're not taught how to be married well or to have relationships. And,
Yeah.
I tell people, the spiritual background inside and outside the church, we're not taught how to build relationships. We're not taught how to communicate. You see my sign there. The biggest communication problem is that we do not listen to understand.
Yeah.
We often listen to reply. But part of our biggest needs is we want to be heard and understood. Those are our biggest needs as people. And so what happens is when people get married, we have all the nice little lovey-dovey feelings in the beginning, the bubbles and all those things. We can't do anything wrong, but eventually we start living together, we get married, and then probably like attachment theory might say, we start to rub on each other's wounds.
Mm.
The person that we pick somehow is uniquely gifted to hit our wounds,
Right?
hopefully so we can bring some or get some healing to the wounds.
Mm.
The challenge is if we don't know how to create a safe environment so we can get that healing. And so we end up in what we may call fear cycles, reactive cycles, conflict cycles. Somebody else called it the crazy cycle the other day. That place where we're fighting one another all the time and we can't hear each other because our pain is too great.
Yeah.
And so part of the work I do is trying to help couples slow down so they can hear each other. But I also try to help people get a lot of personal or self-awareness of their wounds, their triggers and buttons, so they can get some healing from those things. And so a lot of my work is doing that.
Wow, yeah, that was really that I related to that, like that idea that your person is uniquely crafted to kind of touch those wounds in you so that you can get the healing. But if you're unaware of it, then it's almost only exacerbating those wounds in some ways. And humans, we operate out of our own core beliefs. So we're all kind of centered from our own self. And one of the things I find challenging is that when you have a couple, that each person is just wanting the other person to change. They
Mhm.
just want the other person to change, and there's oftentimes resistance to looking inward and being reflective, so that they can figure out kind of doing their own personal work and not just saying, well, they need to be different. And that feels like very much like an impasse to me. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, that can be a big impasse, and a lot of couples come with that. And so what I like to say, you have an external locus of control versus an internal locus of control. But here's the thing about it. You only have power to change one person, and that's yourself.
Yeah.
You do not have the power to change your spouse. You may have a desire. You might even create an environment that can influence change, but you do not have the power to change your spouse. So a lot of the work that I do is helping people to begin to do work and change themselves within the relationship so the relationship can get healthier.
Yes, yes. So as a clinician that works primarily with the couple together, what is your view on collabing with uh the individual therapists of the members of the couple? Like, is that something that you do consistently with your work with the couples? Because we are individual therapists. Neither Jacinto nor myself see couples, but we always see people who are part of a couple that may be seeing a couples therapist.
Yeah. So I look at it this way. I do it sometimes. I don't do it all the time. I always think it's best if you can work as a team, because that way, me as a couples therapist, I might have an understanding of what one spouse is working on in individual therapy and the other one, and then we can often collaborate to help bring things faster. I often tell people, hey, having individual therapy while you're doing couples therapy is a good thing, because let's say I find a trigger or something like feeling not good enough or something like that. I can explore that so much, but only so much within the couples. But client can easily take that back to their individual therapist, and you can dig deeper to understand where does that come from, how does that wound affect them, so on and so forth. So yeah, I do think that partnership is always important. As much as you can do it as much as possible. I find that a lot of times individual work may take longer than couples work, but then I also find that if you're doing individually work, it makes the couples work go a lot easier, because the client then sees what they have power over, what I said, which is themselves, and does work with themselves. And as they bring healing, then that slows down that conflict, that reactive cycle. And so it becomes a whole lot easier to communicate and get healing and understanding, love and partnership and all those things.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that you said if the individuals are doing their individual work, it makes couples work easier because they're coming in with already with an advanced set of tools and skills to do this work together, where actually I believe the work in your space is harder, right? I do think it's harder. So if they are here getting those skills, then they're more prepared. It's like they train out here and then go into the game, into the arena, into the couple space.
Mhm.
Any thoughts on that, Jacinta?
I was just wondering, do you think that when couples come to see you and maybe one of them is in individual therapy and the other has not tried individual therapy, is there more of a chance that the one who hasn't will start to go, or do they kind of remain resistant?
It depends. And here's why, I mean, I hate to give a vague answer, but people come for a lot of reasons. First of all, everybody that comes to couples therapy says we need help with communication. Everybody says that. That's automatically.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things behind that, but everybody says we need communication. Now, a lot of what you ask depends on how and why they came into therapy. Sometimes couples come in, let's just say, I'm gonna use this as an example. Unfortunately, it happens more often than not. But one partner, a lot of times the wife, really wants their husband to get into therapy and he's been resistant. So they come to couples therapy because they feel like the husband needs some work. The truth is the relationship needs some work, and you're probably being manipulative where he is resistant. And so if I have a situation like that, depending on how they respond in couples work, sometimes they open up, sometimes they don't. And if they're not opening up in couples therapy, they're probably not likely to go to individual therapy.
Mm.
So it just depends on the reception of the person. Sometimes both people do it. Sometimes somebody's already come in doing it. Sometimes you have a person that sits there and says, I don't need any help, when they actually need to have a lot of work done.
Yeah.
That person might be resistant to go to anybody's therapy. And usually what happens, they don't even stay in couples therapy very long either. So
Yeah, yeah. I would imagine that with those clients, you see a lot of antagonistic personality challenges there, which narcissistic abuse recovery is one of our specialties here at 3D psychotherapy. So that's very, very interesting. And so communication, couples, how do we get from there, like those interests, to imposter syndrome?
okay.
Is there an imposter syndrome origin story?
So I can actually talk about that in a lot of ways. Now, believe it or not, when I talk about imposter syndrome, sometimes one of the terms I like to say with people is you don't feel good enough.
Mm.
You would be surprised at how often that shows up in marriage.
Oh, yeah.
And so, if feeling not good enough or imposter syndrome can show up in a lot of places, but it does show up a lot in marriages. A lot of husbands feel like no matter what I do, I'm not good enough to please my wife. Or a wife might say, I'm not good enough to please my husband. Or partner says, I'm not good enough to please my partner, or whoever it is, And so that is a big deal. Now, when I talk about imposter syndrome, I do like to say, as I've done a lot of work, a lot of that is my story anyway. I like to say I'm a PPK. My father was a pastor and a policeman. So understanding that he was the law in many ways. Now, while I understand his parenting style, especially as I've gotten older, one of the challenges of sometimes having a more authoritarian parenting style is that a child doesn't really get to make decisions on their own or may not be confident in their decisions. And so that can bring about something of imposter syndrome. Or you can have, the parenting style or another style where someone's criticizing everything you do. And so if you're criticizing everything you do, then sometimes you don't feel like, hey, I can do some work or whatever else. I'm just waiting for it to drop. Sometimes we wear masks, because wearing a mask is safe. And I like to say, really, all of us wear masks. It's just how much of the mask we wear.
Yeah.
But one of the other things in imposter syndrome is sometimes we feel like a fraud and somebody's waiting to discover us. So I do like to say a lot of those aspects are part of my story. I like to say it happens in experience too, starting your own business. Man, nobody's coming. Maybe really I'm not a good clinician.
Hmm.
I thought that. I know a lot of people who did that. Used to be in a group with new clinicians, and all of us were thinking that. We're thinking at the time our supervisors and senior clinicians are seeing 25, 30 people a week, and we can't get 3 in the office, something like that. Something's going on. You talked earlier about couples therapy. One of my stories I often talk about is one of my first couples therapy experiences. I remember I'm coming in, it's a Saturday, ain't nobody else in the office. New clinician, I'm there Saturday. Couple comes in, have a guy who's as big as me, maybe a little bigger, and a short lady, they're coming in. They got conflicts over, I don't even know what happens, why they had conflicts. But what I do remember is one point they started arguing and they got real heated. And I'm sitting in a chair trying to get him to calm down, and the guy stands up. And this guy's about like 6'8", 6'9", and I'm looking at him, Lord, what do I do with this? I'm like, I don't know if I tackle this guy, it's gonna be a fight. I don't know what to do about this. So I'm sitting up here worried, I'm scared, starting to pray, Lord, you gotta help me out of this. But here's the funny thing, that wasn't the scariest part. Because after he stood up and kept going, then this little lady stood up and said, I will cut somebody. And I'm sitting here like, well, if you get me out of here, I ain't seeing no other couples ever again, Lord. And we did make it out the room that day, thank the Lord. But I remember sitting there thinking, hey, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. It doesn't matter that I've been married and for X number of years and whatever. This does not work. And so that's one of those things that can lead to imposter syndrome, talking about things like that, feeling not good enough. Well, the truth is, I just needed to get better at what I was doing.
Yeah.
Or training, more reps, that meant more counseling sessions, more learning how to navigate things, more learning how to develop my own style in that.
Mhm.
And so that's the truth with a lot of things, but we have these beliefs about ourselves that can often keep us from stepping out and doing different things. And so that's what we start talking about when we start looking at imposter syndrome, those false beliefs that turn up in ourselves, especially when opportunities show up.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great story, William. I actually can relate to that. And I'm going to share an imposter syndrome story. And I'm going to ask Jacinta on the spot to share an imposter syndrome story as well. But mine's actually sort of very similar to yours. Not I so I was still in my clinical internship. So I was at St. Jude's Recovery Center, which is, I know they have a new name now, but they were, St. Jude's that used to be downtown. And my clinical placement site was the outpatient treatment, day outpatient. And so it was like, it must have been like the first day of internship or whatever, because it was my first day alone running this group, right? And St. Jude's, how they had their IOP, their day treatment, day outpatient, was there'd be clients that would come from different programs to their outpatient. And so we had some guys from which later I would work at Covenant Community would come over for IOP. We had guys from Trinity House, a Hotep, they would come over, and there was a third place that would come over. And then I think we had there was a women's program. similar to Mary Hall Freedom that would come over. So the group was, you know, a mix of different residences coming together. And although I had done my practicum there and sat in on these groups, this was my first day by myself. And I think we're still doing check-in. Like it was so early in the group. And just two guys from across, like one on this side of the group and one on this side of the group, just stood up and just started to square off in the middle of the group. And if you guys know me, I'm 5 feet tall. Like I am a short human. I was like, what is happening? I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I just said, okay. And I stood up and I stood next to them and I said, you guys have choice and agency, but if you take one more step, both of you are kicked out. So what do you want to do? And I didn't know if that was the right thing to do, if they were going to pick me up and throw me across the room or whatever. But honestly, I think the power of the group really helped to de-escalate it, but I didn't know what I was doing. And that's just one early clinician imposter syndrome story. Like, yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's just natural, especially when you feel things like that early in your career, because you don't know well, the truth is we never really know what we're going to confront or what we're going to deal with, but figuring out how to navigate those things, especially in the moment in time. So,
Yeah. I have several imposter syndrome stories. Um, one of which happened after I came to 3D.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I am trained as a grief specialist. I love doing grief work. And even before I was a clinician, I always felt like death is nothing more than our final episode. That's it. You know, we go on to whatever lies behind this life. That's where we're going. And your funeral is the final ceremony. Um, so when I started doing grief work, I latched onto it right away. I love doing grief work and end of life work, period. Um, at Before I came to 3D, I was working EAP, and so that kind of work is kind of it's a lot easier because it's primarily a one and done. Coming into 3D, kind of early on, I had a lady that came in, and her family was from, I want to say, Trinidad. She had a really heavy accent, so it's kind of hard to understand a lot of what she was saying in the first place. And then she started, every time I would ask her about her mother, who she lost, she would say, she's coming back. I know she's coming back. We don't need to talk because I know she's coming back. And I'm sitting there going, I have no idea what to say to this lady. What do I do? All of this training, what do I have in my toolbox that I can use to help her? And I sat there and I talked to her for a while. And when she left, I felt like I had not helped. I had not helped. And she did not come back. I came to your office, Deborah,
Mm.
and said, hey, what could I have done? I don't know what I could have done. And I have since learned to understand that it was not about what I could have done, but just being there for her and giving her a hand and helping her through that moment. She was still in heavy denial, and just to be there for her and let her know that it was understood would have made a difference instead of, oh no, how can I help this woman? So,
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, I love that you shared that awareness, right? Because I think as clinicians, especially early on, we kind of have this mindset that it's our job to fix, it's our job to help, it's our job to do. When
right,
that's actually not our job at
it's not
all.
our
Our
job.
job is just to be and to be with and be in the passenger seat with them. We're not there to do or fix or that
Yeah.
sort of, and that puts extra pressure on us because I even see it. We have a student, and you know, you can see them in
See
their
the
head
wheels
trying to
turning.
trying to figure it out, like how do I do this thing that is called therapy? And I don't know, it's just it's more of a centering and a being. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love how you did say that, because not just our own expectations, but clients sometimes come in. If you don't do this, you got to fix my marriage. You got to do such and such a thing. I usually hear that and I immediately in my mind, I was like, I'm going to help empower you to make what decision you make to make. You can decide if you want to be married, divorced, whatever you want to do with your marriage.
Yeah.
So, but I like that because I know in my case, it takes the quote unquote pressure off of me. Not that I don't think about it, but like a lot of times clients will come in and bring that to you.
Yeah.
That's their anxiety.
Mhm.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So, William, I am so excited and pleased that you are going to be our trainer and presenter for Geeky Clinicians Academy's first in-person continuing education event. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about that.
Okay. So we're going to be talking about on August 16th, Friday, 9 o'clock. Uh, we will be talking a little bit about identifying and overcoming imposter syndrome. And so we're going to be there together about 3 hours. And we're going to go into it, dive into this some. We're going to talk about what it is, what imposter syndrome is, a little bit about how it shows up in our lives, but also where it comes from. And you heard a little bit about my story, a little bit. Part of it, in my case, has to do with some parenting, but it can come from a few other places too. We're going to break down what it is and a little bit about how it affects us. Talking about how it can limit us from taking advantage of opportunities that may come. We'll preview a little bit what I call the imposter cycle. It's the cycle that everybody goes through when something happens. When someone says, hey, you want to make a presentation here, or how would you like to run for office, or whatever it is, this cycle starts, and we'll talk about, I call it the pros and the challenges of that cycle. Then after that, we'll talk about a little bit about the 5 to 7 different types of imposter syndrome, but also some ways we can regulate when imposter syndrome comes, because it presents different ways depending on what type of imposter you feel like shows up. We'll give you a quiz to even talk about that so you can identify how it shows up in yourself. And then we will also talk a little bit about some extra challenges that marginalized people, BIPOC, or whoever has in dealing with imposter syndrome. Because some of the influences that may add to that is being in an environment where we weren't considered people at one time. Like, I don't know how much of history I'll go into, but oftentimes when I talk to people, I talk about the history of our country in the sense, well, if you are descendants from somebody that was considered 3/5 of the person, and it was written into your government documents that you're 3/5 of a person, that has an effect on how you're treated decades later, because that permeates throughout society. And so because of that, people who are marginalized, BIPOC, different things like that, have some challenges that should be overcome, especially if you live in a society that does not affirm you.
Mm.
So we'll talk a little bit about some of that, identifying it, recognizing it, and learning some ways to deal with imposter syndrome so we can, as we like to say, live our best lives, take advantage of the opportunities we have stronger relationships, friendships, marriages, careers, all those different things.
Wonderful. I'm so excited about this. And so again, it is going to be Friday, August 16th from 9 to 1, right? So about 3 hours. And we've been approved for 3 core CEs from LPCGA. So you need those CEs because it's about to be renewal time in a minute. So come, this is going to be so informative, rich. It sounds like it's going to be interactive. I'm just, chomping at the bit. Like, I'm so excited about it. And so after this video, I'm going to put a link to register. There is limited seating. It's, like I said, it is in person. It's here in downtown Decatur. And so ample free parking at the venue, which was key. And so, so you'll get the link, you'll be able to get your tickets and hear William and learn from him and get your CEs. Excellent. Any final, what's our final question that we usually ask? So, magic wand, kind of looking into the future of the field, right? What are your best hopes for the field of professional counseling, psychotherapy, couples work? What are your best hopes?
I think as I think about this magic wand question, my best hopes are that there are enough competent and well-able clinicians to take care of the needs, that's A, and that there are the finances to support them so they can stay in the field and continue to help others.
Mhm.
And I say that as an important piece because, I am private pay, but I know that there are a lot of people who use different things, insurances, need free therapy, all these different things. People have needs in all sorts of places, and everybody should be able to have access to medical care and mental health therapy because we all need it, no matter where you sit on the income spectrum.
Absolutely.
But also, clinicians need to be able to care for themselves well, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, financially, socially, all those different things, so clinicians can show up and be the best that they can for their clients. And so I like to say that's a big piece. As I talk to people, sometimes that's a big struggle people have, and so I hope, whether it's insurance companies, government agencies, grants, or whatever, that every clinician can take care of themselves well enough financially so they can be present for their clients. So.
Yes.
Wonderful. I second that. That's a great best hope for our field. Excellent. Well, William, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for doing the training coming up on August 16th. Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
all right, so after this, there'll be a link for people to register. And I look forward to seeing both of you in person on August 16th and hopefully everybody else. All right, thank you for coming to our podcast.
Thank you,
Everybody.
William.
Bye.
Bye.